Hey, Rapture family, Minister Jalen Barnes here again with another Kingdom News update. This one's going to be a little bit longer and a little more relaxed because we got a lot of information to get through, but I think it's very important that you understand and think critically about things that you're not going, when you see a headline on the news about something that's happening, and right now we're really going to focus on the state of Virginia here, where we live, but the headline only gives you the broad scope of what's happening. It does not give you the nuance. Even if you read the article, depending on if it's right leaning or left leaning, it's going to give you details that support one viewpoint, but it's not going to give you the nuance, it's not going to give you the historical context, it's not going to give you the civics context. We're going to get into all of that today, but it's very important things that I guarantee you're going to hear some things today that you did not know, that you have never heard before, but that are part of the foundation of how the United States of America operates as a democratic republic, not as a democracy, and supporting you know the difference. So we're going to talk about a lot of things today, but I hope you pay attention and you listen and we learn a lot. So I'm just going to pray to the Spirit of God that you use my voice today and help me to properly disseminate this information so that it will bless the hearer. Thank you, Lord, for it. All right, I've got plenty of notes. I've got a laptop up to look up other notes. So just bear with me as we go through this. Okay, last week, Virginia voted on the Virginia Redistricting Amendment being added to the Constitution. Okay, the vote was yes. So by popular vote, the answer was yes. Let's redistrict. Let us gerrymander the districts so that now it is 10-1 in favor of Democrats as the election reasonably would go in the midterms coming up here. And it will remain that way for the next 3 elections and will not be put back or redistricted according to the census as we originally set up in our Constitution until 2031. It is not until January 2031 that we will be setting up the new districts, assuming that that power is given back as the amendment states it's supposed to be. Call me a skeptic on that matter. But I want to talk about what really happened here, because the delta between yes versus no was less than 100,000 votes. So it was split pretty evenly, that about half of the state didn't want it and about half of the state said they did want it. What I found interesting was that there were interviews that were floating around of people saying they didn't completely understand what this was about. They didn't completely understand what they were voting for, but they saw people that they trusted. For example, one person mentioned they saw Barack Obama appear on the TV. I'm in Virginia. I saw plenty of commercials with him on TV explaining why this was so important. And a lot of people didn't truly understand, and it was actually confusing for them. But they just went with what their party said they should do and what their, political celebrity said that they should do. And that bothers me. It bothers me not that you voted yes, if that's what your conviction were, but it bothers me if you vote yes or no and you don't understand what it is that you're voting for, that you're uneducated, that you're uninformed about what is actually happening and what is taking place. Because if you just go with party lines without thinking critically for yourself, that's how you give a country away. That's how you subvert your own democracy. And we're going to talk about the subversion of democracy, how easy it is to manipulate a country that's supposed to run by the people for the people. It's very easy to subvert democracy while still telling people it was their choice, it was their idea. And we're going to look at Virginia specifically because it was a popular vote. It was only $100,000 difference, less than that actually. It's like 1.5 to 1.4 and some change, but it was less than 100,000, the difference between the yes and the no. And these districts are lined in a way, if you go look them up, that are heavy weighted in Northern Virginia, which is a highly liberal. Like Virginia's a purple state where you got blue and red distributed throughout, but blue is like a liberal stronghold, a Democrat stronghold, right? And these districts are districted in a way that puts a lot of weight in the Northern Virginia areas. So basically, the votes of the population of Northern Virginia is going to weigh heavier than the votes in the places everywhere else in Virginia. Virginia is very diverse. I have not even seen all of Virginia. There are people who have needs and concerns that I don't even think about. I live in the Hampton Roads area. My needs are very different from Northern Virginia, and Northern Virginia's needs are very different from out west and in other areas. But when you look at population centers, and this is important, so follow me here. This is important. The heavy population centers in Virginia are Hampton Roads and then Northern Virginia. In Arlington alone, you have 239,000 people roughly population-wise. Why does that matter? Because although, and we're going to talk about electoral college versus popular vote, although many people feel like popular vote is the way to go, and you're entitled to that opinion, the problem with that is all about population and location. Let me give you a very simple example, just completely made up, that shouldn't offend anybody because it's a made up issue in a made up town in a made up country. It's completely imaginary what I'm about to tell you, but it gives you the idea of what can go wrong with popular vote. Okay, let's say you have an imaginary city called Timbuktu in the middle of the United Provinces of America. Made up place. And in this little town of Timbuktu, there's a railroad. And there's a vote going up for this entire population of this town to vote together. And let's say the population of this town is 250 people. And the vote is, should we shut down the railroad? Now, there are 150 people who live in a nice neighborhood where the railroad goes directly behind the development of houses. And it's very loud, and the railroad runs at night. And so it keeps people awake. So those 150 people who live in that demographic, that geography of being right near that railroad are going to vote. Let's shut down this railroad. Yes. Okay. 150 people right there. Now, on the other side of town, there are 100 people, 50 people less. And those 100 people are where that railroad ends. And that railroad is delivering their food stuff, bread, eggs, whatever. Again, it's all imaginary. But they are depending on that railroad and that train to get to them to deliver their food stuff. The people living in the housing development, where it's 150 people, know nothing about that. But they're about to cast a vote, decide by popular vote, that's going to determine for the entire town of Timbuktu whether or not that railroad stays in operation. But their concerns are vastly different because maybe they don't depend on the provision of that railroad. Only the people on the other side of Timbuktu do. But there's only 100 people there. So the 150 people are going to vote and shut down the railroad and leave the 100 people who depend on that railroad out the railroad. So although every vote counts and every vote is equal, because people are spread out demographically differently or geographically differently, you see the problem with that. How representation gets swallowed up. Because so long as there are a majority of people somewhere else, they can make the decision for everybody else. And that's kind of what happened here in Virginia. Where was billions of dollars, or maybe I'm wrong, it might have been more like million. I'm sorry, I think it was close to like $40 million that was poured into this ad campaign by the Democratic Party to make sure people voted yes. Money that would normally be reserved for midterms. I saw a criticism on the last video that we released here about this topic that said that everybody can still vote the way they want. Everyone's vote still counts. Nothing is changing because it's being gerrymandered. Everyone's votes are still the same. You can change anything anytime you want. And this, what I'm explaining now, is the reason why that's a logical fallacy. Because the problem is, although only 100,000 people more chose this, it is now making it that these districts now being heavyweighted in Northern Virginia are deciding for us who our representatives are, even though we have very different needs where we are versus where they are. Geographically, culturally, demographically. It's vastly different in Northern Virginia to everywhere else. But they're getting to decide from now on for the next 3 elections who represents us. And that's what we're concerned about here in Virginia. We're not even talking about national level, we're talking about who represents us here in Virginia. Our voice is now being circumvented, subverted. Here's my thing. If it's not a big deal and we could change it anytime we want to, then what was the point of this? Why did the Democrat Party feel like it was easier to convince just enough people, just 100,000 people more, to vote yes for a gerrymandered map? It's easier to do that than it was to just fight in the midterms the normal way. Because if you look at the dialogue around why this is happening, what's going on, the Democratic Party is trying to pick up about 3 seats in Virginia so they can control Congress come midterms, okay? That's the Democratic Party. They want that power. And both parties are doing it. They're gerrymandering all over the country because they're trying to pick up seats. And it's about 3 seats that they think they can get from Virginia if they gerrymander. But my question is if it's not a big deal, why do this? Why not just pour that $40 million into running good campaigns and convincing people and try to flip 3 seats with the regular 6-5 map? Why is it easier to rewrite the maps? Did you not believe that your ideas that you could present to people were good enough? You didn't have a strong enough case to convince to flip 3 seats? That's apparently what you're saying, because you're saying that the only way to make sure we get those 3 seats is not to just fight it out like we normally do, but to get people to believe that the way to be fair is to let us redistrict everything so that we guarantee that we have it. We got to rig the system a little bit. Here's the thing. It's all technically legal. Gerrymandering is not illegal. What was illegal was how fast it got on our ballot. The Constitution and the legislation of Virginia was actually violated. That is why this week, the state of Virginia Supreme Court is hearing arguments from the Republican Party and from citizens that this was done illegally. Here is my concern and the problem with that. The Supreme Court could have heard that argument before this ever got on the ballot, but they decided to wait until after the vote to make their decision. And here's why that's a problem. Let me read a headline. Virginia Supreme Court considers whether to block voter-approved legislation. Now that's the new narrative. But let's not say how headlines don't give you the full dialogue, the full story. The narrative now is, if the Supreme Court looks at the law in the Constitution of Virginia and correctly says, yes, this should have never made it to the ballot because y'all broke the rules on how fast you can get this here. Y'all didn't follow the procedure correctly. There are safeguards in place and y'all bulldoze those safeguards. If they do that, the narrative isn't going to be the Virginia Supreme Court upholds the rules and the legislation and the Constitution of the state of Virginia. The headline is going to be Virginia Supreme Court blocked what the voters approved. Get how that works? Get how easy it is to subvert democracy by wording, by propaganda, by the way you spin the narrative. Now it'll look like Virginia Supreme Court is violating the will of the voters because now the voters voted. And you're like, well, it should be the will of the voters. Well, it was the will of the voters. We had districts that were set. Why not just come and fight it out and convince us, the voter, to vote for you to flip these seats? If it's so important, Democrat Party, as you have these seats, make the same argument and say, go vote in the midterms and vote these Republicans out so we can get 3 more seats. Make the case. But this way, it was easy to just pour money into making one case. Vote yes, restore fairness, defeat President Trump, defeat MAGA, defeat Republicans, make it, that's the narrative. It's a lot easier to convince just 100,000 more people of that because some of them won't even understand what they're voting for. But if you put their political celebrity up on the screen, then they'll just go along with it and say, well, they know what's best for me, so I'm going to vote along, even though I'm not totally sure what this is all about or why this makes any sense. It didn't pass the sniff test, but a lot of us weren't sniffing. And so I believe that's what happened here in Virginia. And so we now have people who are heavy weighted in other areas that are liberal leaning deciding for us what gets to happen. Because our votes, no, they don't count as much. Well, technically they do. Yes, technically on paper. But that's the problem. That's the problem with a pure democracy versus a democratic republic, which is what we have in the United States. A lot of people don't know the difference.